Welcome to the Straight Talk on Fleet podcast with Erin Gilchrist. Each week, Erin will be breaking down fleet management, trying to cut through the noise and get down to the real issues safety and operations leaders are struggling with every day. The goal will be to get to the bottom of how leaders can break down these silos of information, accelerate change management, how to use real-time, accurate data to drive massive efficiencies across fleet-focused business processes, and to elevate people's careers with emerging best practices. Now it's time for the Straight Talk on Fleet.
Okay, welcome back, Fleet community. We are back for another episode of the Straight Talk on Fleet. I am Erin Gilchrist. I am VP of Evangelism at IntelliShift. So on my podcast, what I try to do is just be a reliable source for you who's objective and share information about the fleet ecosystem based on my experience that comes from running an enterprise-sized fleet for many, many years. I know fleet management's hard. It's probably harder than it needs to be. So I try to break it down fleet manager style. So with that said, we're going to do that in fine fashion today with our guest. I'd love to introduce you our guest, Bob Martinez. Welcome, Bob.
Thank you
so much for being with us. Bob is not only our guest today, but my friend and colleague, and he has spent a lot of time in our industry. So let me just kind of do a quick intro and then we'll let Bob speak for himself. So Bob has had quite the career so far, spending the past 36 plus years, I think 36 and a half years at the NYPD. He started out as an auto mechanic many years ago and has held several positions since: supervisor, director of fleet services division, executive director of support services, and for the past 8 years as deputy commissioner of the support services bureau. So they do a lot of things. The bureau provides logistical and technical support to all the commands within the NYPD and services the public through the operations of the fleet services division, property clerk division, central records, and printing. So Bob oversees approximately 800 members of the service and an annual operating budget of over 153 million. So big job, great career so far. Wow. I'm sure I didn't do you justice, Bob. So just spend some time telling us in your own words a little bit more about your background and what your role is today at the NYPD. And then we will spend some time digging into our topic for today's podcast, which I am personally terming as the art of adapting, according to Bob Martinez. So, okay, with that, Bob, tell us about you.
All right, so we'll start at the beginning of my career here at the NYPD. I mean, even prior to that, I was involved with mechanical stuff. I actually started my career as young as 12 years old, working in a motorcycle shop. And my first 10 years, I guess, or more, I worked on motorcycles. And that's how I ended up getting into the NYPD. We were selling parts to the NYPD to fix their Yamaha scooters at the time, and I started having babies and needed a job with benefits, so I started hiring at the NYPD, and I gave them my short resume at the time, and they hired me pretty much right away. When I started with the NYPD, was that on day one, I went to the motorcycle shop, and normally back then you had to work 15, 20 years in the motorcycle shop, but because I came from the motorcycle world, they put me right in the bike shop back in June of '86, that was. And then I was a mechanic, and originally I was hired as provisional, and to get a permanent city job, you have to take a test, a civil service test. So it took a couple of years before the test came out, and it got marked, and I got hired off a permanent list. So that brings me all the way out to March of '88. And then roughly 7 years after that, or 10 years as a mechanic, through another civil service test, I was able to become a supervisor of mechanics. And then I was a supervisor mechanic for another 10 years roughly. And then I started getting discretionary promotions. And while I was a mechanic, I went back to school and got my associate's degree in mechanical engineering. And then I went back and got a bachelor's degree in electromechanical engineering, which actually pays dividends now as we transition into electric vehicles, because it gives me a lot of insight into what's happening and what the needs are in the infrastructure, but we'll get more into that later on. So I had to send the discretionary promotions, and eventually, I believe it was in 2006, became the director of the fleet. And then I became the director of the biggest police fleet in the United States, not necessarily in the world, but in the United States, probably the third or fourth biggest in the world. And then after doing that for 3.5, 4 years, I was asked to come down downtown here, as we call it, the headquarters or the Glass Palace. And just prior to that, while I was director, I went back to school and got my master's degree at NYU in executive management. Just because I thought I was a good leader, I thought I knew how to do things, but I wanted to formalize that and get some formal education in the management and leadership area. And NYU has a really great executive program, a management program in their master's program. And so I came down, and at that point, I rolled into the executive director spot. First time that a mechanic or anybody from fleet services actually came and took over a spot in the bureau. I actually displaced a 2-star chief, so which is even more rare that a civilian would take a 2-star chief's job. And then the NYPD and military world is all about the stars. So now I'm a deputy commissioner. So as an executive director, I'll be a 2-star spot. Now as a deputy commissioner, I'm a 3-star spot. So then in September of 2014, we had a new commissioner, Commissioner Bratton, and he wanted to know why I was the only executive at NYPD, being the largest responsibility I have of, as we mentioned already, 800 people and $150 million budget, as well as 39 locations. And then he made me a deputy commissioner, and that's pretty much my role there between both education and my career. And then after I was the executive director, I had the opportunity to go up to Harvard for a couple of weeks. And I spent 3 weeks full time. So it's almost equal to a couple semesters of regular college part-time, where it was, literally 35 hours a week of learning and training at the Kennedy School at Harvard University, which was a real great experience to do that. And that was a lot of the same type of education and leadership that I learned or encountered at NYU. But it was really good stuff, really great education on the leadership role. Great author to read on leadership. We learned like 7 Habits, Highly Effective People, Stephen Covey, and as well as Daniel Goldman, who 6 different styles of leadership, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of real good leadership material out there. But what was real interesting was I was able to experience the NYU and then also Harvard. And it was amazing how the same authors and a lot of the same material is used on the leadership roles.
Yeah, I'm with you. I've read so many of those books, and in my professional career, spent a lot of time in leadership development type of training, and it's the best kind. I wouldn't trade it for anything. The people part is the most important part. And it sounds like, I loved hearing about the fact that you've been able to work and raise a family and continue to move up while continuing to further your education. So it's just, it's impressive. I love it.
Yeah, well, you left out an important part. My wife played a major role because without her, but there was a point where I was going for my master's and she was going for her master's at the same time. But at that point, the kids were a little older. So
yeah, that's a challenge to say the least. So good for you both. That's just fantastic. So, well, thanks for sharing a little bit about you and how you kind of got to where you are today. But guys, every time I talk to my audience about adjusting and adapting and change management. But every time I talk to Bob, I hear a great story or something that reminds me of how good Bob is at this art of adapting. So before we dig into some of the situations that have kind of shaped the way that you've learned to adjust and adapt, I think it would be helpful for the audience to understand your scope. So tell us a little bit about how many assets and what's the workforce and a little infrastructure around what you're managing and like the city population and stuff, so people can get their head around, kind of what you're dealing with on a day-to-day basis.
Okay, so the city's made up of 5 boroughs. So with that said, last time they did a count, which is only, I think, a year ago, I think we're just somewhere in the ballpark of 8.5 million people. So in addition to 8.5 million people, we probably have 3 million, if not more, come to the city every day. between, the different higher education that we have. We have many colleges within the city. We have, Columbia University here, NYU, and then the workforce. Quite a few people. We actually have, I think, on a high day, we have probably 5 to 6 million people that use the subway system. So it's really a lot of people coming in and out. Now, what we have here in the NYPD, we're supposedly equal to the 7th largest military force, because we're semi-military in the world. So we roughly 55 or 54,000 people or members of service. 17,000 of that is civilians, and another 36,000, 37,000, depending on the day or the year, because it varies, uniform. But that's the type of numbers we deal with. Now, getting on the fleet side, we're roughly 10,000 assets within our fleet, just under or 7,500 road fleet, because we have a lot of vehicles that are off-road vehicles and trailers and stuff like that. We have horse trailers and motorcycles. The regular fleet is probably something between 7,000 and 8,000. Once again, it fluctuates. And then in addition to the vehicles that we have here at the NYPD, we also fix the vehicles for Department of Transportation and Department of Environmental Protection. So we had some consultants come in a few years back wanting to privatize our operation, and just the opposite happened. They were so impressed with the operation and statistics we have, and we do a thing called Fleet Stat, that they, instead of privatizing, they gave us more work. So we ended up with another 1,600 vehicles to fix. So
Of course they did.
Yeah. So yeah, we have a lot on our hands. So we have on the fleet side, in totality, I have 39 facilities under me, but 13 of those facilities are fleet facilities. And we have about 400 members of service assigned to the fleet operation. I think we're at 30 or 40 uniform, and the rest are civilian workforce.
Wow. Okay, I know the audience is probably trying to wrap their head around that, but so am I. It's it's quite a workload. And despite all that, I think what's interesting about the city is just the density, right? At any given time, how many people are moving about, how many vehicles are moving about, and then God forbid, something happen to interrupt the flow of everything that's happening in your city. So I think it'd be fun now as we move into this topic of sort of like adapting and adjusting to hear a little bit about some of the things that have happened that we're all familiar with, but what that meant for you and your operation and the people of the city, some things you encountered and how you adapted. So let's start with one that's near and dear to everyone's heart, and talk a little bit about 9/11 and kind of, what that meant for your operation and some things that you had to do differently, probably going forward, for probably changed the whole trajectory of how you look at safety and security in your city. But I'll let you take it from here.
9/11 is definitely an event that I guess none of us will ever forget, but especially me. So at the time, I was the supervisor of a shop on the West Side Highway, which is literally a couple miles north of Ground Zero. But that, being close and actually witnessing the second plane go in live is something I can never get out of my head. To this day, when I see a plane flying in the sky, for some reason, I'm waiting for it to blow up or crash. It's just something that got etched in my head there. So during that time, being with the NYPD, our biggest concern was what else is happening. So I remember a lot of things very vividly from that day. My son, or at the time, my kids went to, I have 4 kids. All 4 kids were in 4 different schools throughout the city. And my oldest actually went to high school in Manhattan. And my other kids were in different schools throughout Queens. And my first concern was where they are and what they're doing and get them home. But meanwhile, there was no, we didn't have cell phones then, and it was very hard to get in touch with people. And so I had to put kind of my family on the side and figure out what we're going to do. And we didn't know what we're going to do. So the biggest concern at the NYPD is, where does it end? Is this a one-off? Was this an accident? Obviously, to myself anyway, when I saw the second plane go in, I kind of knew it wasn't an accident. And I even mentioned to a fellow I was next to, I said, is this terrorist? He goes, what do you mean terrorist? I said, well, it just seems like a terrorist act to me. And I was right on point, not even realizing how on point I was. So with that said, and watching the second plane go in live, and then watching the buildings come down, and listening to the police radio of, a member of service actually screaming on the radio as the building was collapsing around her, Martha Smith, her name was. It was quite disturbing. But then we had to figure out how do we keep the city safe? Are there going to be more attacks? Are there going to be secondary explosions out there? Because a lot of terrorists plan an event and do secondary devices and explosions to kill the first responders as they respond. But that's unfortunate. It's the world we live in when it comes to terrorism. So we'll move on to the second day. But I remember going down to the pile that night, and I saw a friend of mine that I knew for many years, Frank Fellini, and he was a chief in the fire department. And at this point, over 300 members of the fire department, it was 342, perished that day, with the initial collapse, as well as thousands of other people, as well as thousands of people jumping out the windows of buildings and what have you, just because they couldn't get away from the flames. So I remember walking down to the pile, and this big crowd of everything from National Guard to firemen from other counties, police officers, all around my friend Frank Fellini, and we made eye contact, and he was in charge, and you could just tell like he had no clue on how to handle it, tell people, and do it. But we moved on, and that was actually the last time I saw Frank Fellini or heard from him, from that point on. But he did not perish; he had to retire, but he was one of the only fire chiefs living. So let's circle back into where the fleet thing. So it turned out a ballpark of 180 vehicles had some type of damage or sucked in dust. And so this dust, when those buildings came down, it was very similar to like a nuclear reaction. It created a vacuum. And door panels and lenses, taillight lenses, got packed with dust. So you take the lens off or the door panel off, and it wouldn't be broken, but it would be completely packed with this dust as if you used spray foam insulation. How it got in there, how it got so compact, I have no idea, but this is just what we found. So we cleaned roughly 180 vehicles. We had to disassemble these vehicles. We had to wash them down, vacuum them, and get these vehicles back in service. Now we did that over probably a 16 to 18 month period. But initially we wanted to get the emergency service trucks back in service because our large rescue trucks and small rescue trucks got damaged. So some of the trucks had the cabs damaged, some had the boxes damaged, so we would tow them back and try to make one good truck out of two trucks. But General Motors and Ford Motor Company and Chrysler at the time, they would deliver us chassis, just deliver them, and we would put boxes on the back to try to get the issue back. And then we had roughly 40 motorcycles that Harley drove out from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. They actually physically rode these bikes and delivered them to us for free and just gave us these motorcycles as a donation. BMW offered us a bunch of motorcycles too, but we don't ride BMW motorcycles here, and my highway guys are very picky, so we returned them actually, but that's a whole story of the day. But that was the 9/11 thing. The unfortunate thing is, those vehicles that got cleaned, about 5 of my mechanics are no longer with us because they came down with terminal cancer years later from cleaning the vehicles and breathing in this dust that was claimed to be safe that wasn't safe. So I do have a lot of experience dealing with hazmat stuff now. So now when we do have a steam pipe explosion or something like that, I quickly get the vehicles, and I actually don't even try to fix them. We just condemn the vehicles and crush them or send them as a hazmat to a landfill. I have very strict rules on what we do and how we do it because, as we were told back then from the federal government that the dust was safe, nothing to worry about. And obviously it was not safe since we have at least 5 members that work for me that are no longer with us. So that's my 9/11 story in a short spiel.
Well, it's just, thanks for sharing that. That's just so hard. I'm so sorry for the losses that you experienced and your experience during that time. That's traumatic. And it's just amazing. I'm sure there are so many other things and so many lessons learned, but it's crazy living in a city where not only that happened, but a lot of other things happen, major events and diplomats and people coming in to New York City from all over the world, and what the police department has to do to support those efforts, I'm sure is so significant. But another, thing that we talked about in our conversation recently was, storms, snowstorms and things like that. But talk a little bit about Superstorm Sandy. That was big, and it had a big effect on your operation. Tell our audience a little bit about what happened and what you had to do to adapt.
Right. So 10-year anniversary this year. So it's 10 years ago.
Yep.
And there's some things that happened back then that we're still dealing with 10 years later. Still no resolution to it. So once again, I don't just do fleet. I also do property clerk. So my property clerk division got hit almost worse than my fleet. The property side, I had 2 warehouses as well as my cold storage records warehouse go underwater, literally 5 or 6 feet of water. And then we had a number of vehicles that went underwater as well during Superstorm Sandy. And then we also had a blackout, and we also could not get fuel. So there was no fuel being delivered because all of the ports got knocked out. So we had to actually, another one of my duties running the fleet is we have 60 fueling locations, as well as the harbor patrol for the boats. We do their fueling as well. So all that got wiped out. So we had supplied fuel for all our vehicles, as well as eventually our members of service to get them to come to work, because the whole entire metro area had no fuel deliveries. And we had a blackout for about 4.5 to 5 days, no electricity. So, but just going back to the property clerk, so my auto pound completely underwater, 4,000 vehicles submerged. We had and I'm still dealing with this. I had approximately 9,000 barrels of biological evidence, which nowadays they call it DNA evidence, but it's biological evidence go underwater, as well as my warehouse, another warehouse of evidence, and then my cold storage records. So we actually sent 27 tractor-trailer truck loads of records up to Canada to have the records dried, gamma-rayed, digitized, repackaged, and sent back millions of dollars. 27 tractor-trailer truck loads of old records to do that. And then I have, like I say, 9,000 barrels of this evidence that I still have that got contaminated. It was the biggest contamination of police property in the history of the world, and we're still dealing with it. And it was kind of dropped in my lap, and I really was never an evidence specialist or expert, but I kind of know a lot about evidence now after living through all this stuff.
You do.
So getting back to the fleet world. So the fleet world, we had to, once again, get vehicles delivered, get them back. We got to keep everything rolling. And then the big decision was, which came up between the police commissioner and mayor and put me in an odd spot, was that our members of service couldn't get fuel either. So if you remember correctly, that was the same time when the president election was up for re-election. And the federal government, should say, they were bringing some fuel in, but they decided to give whatever fuel they were getting to give it to the general public because they were trying to boost votes. So we had no fuel. And in fact, even the National Guard had no fuel, except for what I was able to get. So we were able to drive upstate New York. We have tanker trucks, and we were bringing fuel in. And then at some point, we were being approached because our members of service didn't have fuel. So we wanted to get fuels to our members of service. And we decided to do it with a program together. We used the people's ID cards on the last number. If it was even, they could get gas on an even day. If it was an odd number, they can get gas on an odd day. We had security teams at these fueling locations to give our members of service, and we would only give them 10 gallons a day. And very shortly after word got out that we were doing this, I got a text message directly from the mayor saying we're not allowed to give fuel to our members of service. So I then contacted the police commissioner, Commissioner Kelly Thomas, said, "Hey, boss, what do you want me to do? I got this text message." And he said to me, "Bob, disregard, I'm in charge, and we'll continue to get fuel." So we proceeded to get fuel. And in totality, I think we gave away 64,000 gallons of fuel. And we were able to keep our members of service coming to and from work. We also have 20 buses, usually on average, in our fleet. And we also started our own bus service. We had a whole bus route to bring people to and from precincts and pick them up at the city line and do whatever we got to do. But once again, flexibility, just adjusting. Another big thing was light towers. We had to light everything up. We had no electricity, so we literally got our hands on every light tower. Now the other problem with light towers is that you have to fuel them. And originally we had the light towers only running at night, but then we saw that the community liked to plug in their iPhones and iPads and whatever portable devices they got into our light towers, and they were actually putting extension cords into the light towers to charge up their personal devices. So then I suggested to the police commissioner that we should put these surge protector on all the light towers that you could plug in multiple devices. So we put 2 surge protectors that had like 10 outlets each, so 20 outlets. And so, but now we had to run the light towers 24/7, not just at night. And literally they became like the focal point of each little community. There would be 20, 30 people standing around every light tower charging up their devices. But it was great because we were able to communicate with those people at that point. The other thing I'm also in charge of is printing. And that's when we realized that printing becomes very valuable when you don't have electricity, because one of the only ways to communicate with the general public is to print stuff and hand it out in housing projects or apartment buildings and stuff, and tell them where food and shelter might be available or resources might be available, because there was no communication, no way to, people didn't have the TVs on, and etc.
Wow. That's just so much to take in. A lot of creative minds working together, the odd and even ID to the odd and even day. I mean, that's just it's creative, it's adapting, adjusting. So when I think about what's going on in our environment right now with supply chain issues and high fuel prices, it'll be great for our audience to hear that they're going to be okay. We'll get through this, because if you can get through Superstorm Sandy and you're still dealing with things, I think we can, try to make it through some of these times that we're dealing with right now. What other kind of events happen on a regular basis in your city that you guys have to prep and prepare for on a consistent basis?
Well, we'll start off with today. Today is the tree lighting. So the whole world, well, at least a decent number of people around the world will be watching at 9:55 tonight when the mayor flips the switch to turn on the tree.
Yes.
So we will literally have and today's bad weather. It's raining here in the city and stuff, but we'll literally have 1 million people in a 4-block area trying to all see the tree get lit at the same time. So that's a big security issue, big crowd control. But we've been doing this for years. We have the Thanksgiving Day parade, last week on Thursday, one of the biggest watch parades in the world. Times Square, I was one particular Times Square evening. I had my own little pen area where my family and friends were allowed to get a very good view of the dropping of the ball. And it happened to show me right next to Brian Seacrest, and my phone went crazy. Everybody was texting me and emailing me, "You're on TV, you're on TV." So and literally from around the world, because when I went to Harvard, that was 60 people from around the world that attend that. People from England and Australia and Hawaii and et cetera. So it gave me connections to people and networks from around the world, as well as my fleet folks from around the world and the country. So yeah, so so tree lightings, parades, United Nations. This year we had probably one of the largest United Nations things going on. We had, the heads of states from all around the world come here every September to meet, and we have to do all that security and clear them, and a lot of security issues, and a lot of countries that we, as the United States, are not always the friendliest with, but we have to deal with them, and they have their security issues. We have our security issues, so. Very, very interesting on how we have to deal with all that, as well as, what the president's doing. We got to coordinate getting him in, getting him safe, and then we got to do that with their people, and they don't like sharing a lot of information, so we're kind of on call to just adjust to whatever, depending on the weather and conditions. He'll come in by helicopter. If not, he'll land at an airport, and we'll have to close all the roadways. So we have to be able to adapt to whatever's going on with the president and the VIPs coming in.
Yeah, sounds like a lot of fun, Bob, but I don't want your job ever. Okay, I mean, except for like the celebrity part, because I feel like you're like a fleet celebrity, and then now I know that you were like hobnobbing with Seacrest.
Yeah, well, I do have pictures actually, it'll be a year in January where I met President Biden, and then a few years earlier I met President Trump. So I have pictures with both of them. So,
Oh, nice. Very
yeah.
cool. Yeah, I want to come in your office and look at all your stuff one day. I'm sure I can do that. I'll visit you next time we get to go to Capitol Hill together and lobby for something fleet related, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you talked a little bit about getting that call, like that text message from the mayor, but you report to the police commissioner. I mean, how often does that reporting structure sort of cause angst for you? Your
Well,
job.
yeah, we're actually a lot more with this administration. So, and some we just can't get into until after I retire. Um, but yeah, we have a little different dynamic this year. We have this administration, this mayor, Mayor Adams, has a deputy mayor of public safety, and he oversees the police department, corrections department, the sheriff's department, basically all law enforcement parts of that. And it just happened to be he was also my roommate at Harvard. So I spent 3 weeks with the new deputy mayor. So he retired from the police department years back, but now he's got came back, got recycled, as we say. So that kind of puts me in a unique position sometimes when he's asking me for stuff. But because I know him so well, I'm not shy. Is that if he asks me for something, I can tell him that I really need you to ask the police commissioner for that. And I've done that a few times. So every administration is a little different, but with this administration, I always like to make sure, and my policy is I always let everybody know who my boss is. So, and even if the mayor asks me to do something, I would probably do it, but my second call would be right to the commissioner saying, well, I'm being told to do this by the mayor. And then if she said, because now we actually have our first female police commissioner here, Cecon Stool, and she's amazing. She's really incredible, and very happy to have her, and just thankful that who she is. And talk about a great leader, she's phenomenal. So yeah, so right now that's the way I work is that I work for the police commissioner, and I just make sure that they're in the loop one way or another.
Yeah. Yeah. Sounds like even more fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So we talked a little bit about sort of all the things changing in the industry too. And this whole EV revolution has come to be. Now you have some experience with your education, but how might that shape out, or maybe what are some of the things you're doing now, and what are some of the futuristic things that you're thinking about when you think about electrification and the fleet for the NYPD?
Yeah, so we're in the midst of doing that now. We have 31 Chevy Bolts, fully electric Chevy Bolts. We have them for about 2 years now. We use them for some traffic agents use those. We have them for supervisors of school crossing guards, and we have them in school safety. And they've been working out real well, fully electric. But who they use, they're not 24/7, 1 or 2 tours a day at best, and then they're not used on the weekends primarily. So they have a lot of, as we refer to nowadays, as dwell time or downtime to charge. Since then, or this past year, I just received 148 Mustang Mach-E's. The retail car, it's not a police car. I test drove one about a year ago, and then the mayor's office, along with the Department of General Services, said they were willing to pay for us to get a few of these. So we decided on getting the Mach-E Mustang GT model because I wanted the steel roof with the bigger battery, which is no longer going to be available with a steel roof next year. So we're just starting to put those in service now. So out of the 148, 40 of them are unmarked and 108 are marked. And so we're giving them out. So right now I'm trying to give them to executives. I made a deal with them. If you give me an SUV, I'll give you a brand new Mustang. And they didn't think I was serious, but I was 100% serious. And that's what we've been doing. So we gave out 27 of the unmarked Mach-E's. And then we're going to be giving out probably next week 30 or 40 of the marked cars. So the biggest problem with that, with the whole transition and the electric vehicle revolution, at least for the NYPD, it's probably, the the same throughout, but more for PDs because we use our vehicles 24/7. So that charge time is so critical. We don't have the luxury of having dwell time. We get 2 officers out of a car, 2 more officers get in a car. So there's no time to charge these things up. The unfortunate thing is that we only have a limited number of fast chargers, DC fast chargers, and the ones we got are slow fast chargers. So they're only 50 kilowatt. So the vehicles we got have a 98 kilowatt battery. So if you're fully depleted, just ballpark, it's over 2 hours to charge with a 50 kilowatt charger.
Yep.
And then almost all the cars now will never charge up 100% fast charge. They'll only do 80% fast charge and then slow down to 20% for the last 20%. So in totality, to charge up a Mach-E, if you're down to 10% battery, it's 2.5 hours to charge the car up. That's if we even have a DC fast charger. So as we're moving forward, I've been on some advisory boards for some new buildings, and I'm telling them I need 15 250 kilowatt charging stations. So basically a megawatt of electricity available just to charge cars, never mind the facility. And they all think crazy. Then I need redundancy because we have blackouts. So I need 2 generators, one for the building and one just to charge the vehicles. So and they just thought I was over forecasting, but I think they're finally starting to smarten up. Now, I also had the luxury of going down to Capitol Hill, like you used to do a couple of years ago this year with the NAFA folks, and we were able to sit down with 24 members of the correctional staff and congressional staff and educate them a little bit about the infrastructure and charging. And the way I like to let people kind of visualize or understand the amount of electricity we're talking about is that the average house now is 220 volts, 200 amps. So that's just in the ballpark of 50 kilowatts or 45 kilowatts because amperage times voltage is wattage, right? So when a car plugs in, that's like you turning every switch on in your house, every air conditioner, every light bulb, everything. So as an engineer, when we spec out an electrical panel for a house, we spec it out that you're only going to use 70% of that panel at any one given time. Now you're going to be using 100% of that panel at one time. So you need all the voltage and all the electricity. So now getting into the plan that just came out, and what I call Biden's Plan 1, the NEPI plan. So this is one of the plans is that if states want to get this money, that they got to come up with a program to install charging stations throughout the state on every interstate. So it's every 50 miles, 1 mile off the interstate, have a charging location, and the charging location needs to be for a minimum of 450 kilowatt charging stations. So I just said 150 kilowatt is one house. So that's the equivalent of building 12 houses every 50 miles, 1 mile off every interstate throughout the whole country. So, and have all their electricity readily available all the time. So that's the first dilemma, is the infrastructure and getting it. Now, me here in NYPD, I can't even park my police cars close to our precincts, never mind have a charging location anywhere close. Right. And all the facilities are more than 50 years old. So we have a big infrastructure problem getting these cars charged up. And, right now, and I'm also on the advisory board for General Motors and Ford Motor Company, both for their regular vehicles and their electric vehicles. And it seems the direction they're going in to try to counteract and reduce the charge time. Right now, the voltage on most of these cars are 400, 450 volts. It looks like they're going to start pumping it up to 800 volts. So if we pump the voltage up to 800 volts, we can actually reduce the charge time. But with that said, it means that this whole charging infrastructure we're installing is already going to be antiquated. So there's a lot on the infrastructure side to put in there, and then redundancy. Microgrids are a must. 12 years ago, the whole Northeast went out with a computer glitch. We lost all the electricity for I believe it was a 24-hour or 48-hour period. We're so reliant on electricity throughout our whole world. I mean, just think now, if the power went out, me and you would probably get disconnected and we wouldn't be talking, right? So we're so reliant on electricity for everything in our lives that we need redundancy, and we also need to pump up, which is the governor of New York is already doing. If we're not making green electricity, what are we really doing? Are we just bringing the carbon monoxide from the tailpipe to the electric plant, right? So So in New York State here, 30% of the electricity is hydroelectric and 20% is nuclear, which I didn't even realize myself until I started researching this. And then the other 50% is still gas and oil. So right now, here in New York State, we're building wind turbines around Long Island and solar panels. The problem with wind and solar is the wind doesn't always blow and the sun doesn't always shine. So now we need battery storage. So with solar panels, it makes direct current, which you can store, but the wind turbines make alternating current, which you can't store. So right now we need battery storage in addition to solar and wind. But where I really see the direction going, and there's more and more talk, and General Motors is really going to start to spearhead, is they just actually started a new energy division within General Motors, and you're going to see with the medium and heavy duty trucks and other things is hydrogen. Hydrogen is going to be, but once again, hydrogen is made from natural gas, so it's just as polluting to make hydrogen as what you get, because the byproduct of a hydrogen engine is water. But if we can make green hydrogen using the wind turbines and the solar, using fuel cells in reverse, then we might actually be on the right road to really accomplishing what I think we want to accomplish. But electric vehicles 85% efficient on getting the energy to the wheels. Internal combustion engine vehicles maybe 20% efficient. So there's no doubt that the electric vehicle is the most efficient. But I think we're going to really see a big move and a big push very quickly, very shortly on the hydrogen side.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't surprise me. And you think about, you're dealing with it in your on your boards on a greater scale, but in your city and in your area, but thinking about on a national scale, what it's going to really, really take from an infrastructure standpoint to support the number of electric vehicles, even if every fleet said, I want to be 20% electric by 2030. That's still a huge undertaking, just based on what you shared with us about your area, and having to do that on a national level seems a little daunting. I was just at Fleet Forward Fleet Safety Conference, and there was a lot of talk about kind of all these topics. And I think for fleet managers out there who are listening, the biggest thing was like fleet managers talking about, how do I even get started? I mean, what do I even do? And hearing you talk about the complexities within your city, I think our audience is probably going to be listening in and saying, gosh, yeah, this is more complex than what they ever imagined. But I think the great place to start for fleet managers is to work with their partners, their fleet management companies and their OEMs, and really to start to build out that model for their unique situation, their unique fleet, and just get started, figure out how to implement EVs where they fit, kind of cherry pick the vehicles that are prime for replacement with EV, where they have infrastructure or where they can build infrastructure and start there. I mean, because everybody's got to start somewhere, but, it's certainly a complex issue.
Yeah. You got to get your feet wet with it and see what works. But, just think of how dense New York City is with all our apartment buildings. Like, where were they going to charge? Like, and now a lot of buildings don't even want electric vehicles in their underground parking garages, because when an electric vehicle does go on fire, it's very difficult to put out, because now it's a metal fire, and these batteries now, when they do go on fire, even when the fire's out, they can start back up 2 hours later because the energy is still in the battery itself. And recently here in the city, they do zoning laws that all new big construction has to be electric only. So you can't heat the building with gas or oil. You have to heat it with electric only. So it's just another big demand, or a lot of people are going to be competing for electricity. And I don't know if you heard recently, they want to now the thing about banning cooking with natural gas. To have electric stoves only throughout the whole country.
No.
So. Yeah, just a lot of thought needs to go into this, and like I say, my biggest thing where I sit is redundancy and having reliable power. That if the lights do go out, we have backup plans. I'm all about backups and redundancy and generators, and it's illegal to have battery storage here in the city. Now, one really good point of an electric vehicle is if you get a bi-directional charger, you can plug the vehicle in and then energize your facility for a while. So, in my specs that I just gave to my building folks, I told them I need 15 250 kilowatt charging stations, but they need to be bi-directional. So we could plug in one or two police cars and actually keep the building running until the electric comes back on for a while.
Yeah, wow. It's good stuff, Bob. I think we could sit here and talk for like the whole day. Yeah. We'll have to do this again sometime, but I want to respect your time. I know that you're very, very busy doing all the things that you talked to us about and much, much more. But I just want to thank you for spending time with us. I hope that the fleet community listening enjoyed hearing Bob's stories and just a little bit about what it is to really adjust and really adapt as a fleet and safety and infrastructure sort of operational leader that Bob is. And I know many fleet managers listening wear a lot of hats too, Bob. And so hopefully they gain some inspiration and thought from our conversation today. But for the fleet community, thanks for listening. And I'd love to hear your feedback on what we talked about today. So like and subscribe wherever you find content. But until next time, we like to say on the Straight Talk on Fleet, keep it real, keep it safe for fleet's sake. And thanks for listening. And Bob, thanks for being with us today.
Bye-bye.
Bye.